So in terms of your Ibogaine experience with the Bwiti people, what was that like? What did it actually feel like when you did it?
When I was making the piece, I was actually trying to de-emphasize my own experience. Often when I do these things, it ends up being about me. And one thing that I was trying to
Mhm.
do in this most recent series was to direct things in a verite direction and to try to direct them away from me and my own explanation, because I think people have a real appetite for sort of infotainment. They want people to explain everything to them.
Mhm.
And I was kind of hoping that a lot of the experience could come via observation of other people, but there is, of course, something missing there. And really, I chose to emphasize the experience of a local Gabonese man who was suffering from addiction to tramadol, and to tell the story through his perspective and his transformation, because I am fortunate enough to not have any opioid problems. And I thought that if the point was to show this different perspective, to show
Mhm.
somebody else who's suffering, who's a local person in Gabon, that would be the best way to tell the story. But part of the ritual is they did want everyone to use Ibogaine, the elderly, children, babies, camera crew, and myself.
Babies.
And yes, babies, yeah.
Wow.
But they, they're intelligent about their dosing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm not going to get into the safety of giving Iboga to an infant. I mean, I was talking with one of the people from the church yesterday, and who's been using it since they were probably an infant, and they're certainly um, sane and functional. They're a student. They're responsible. They have a great relationship with their family. So I think it's, well, I wouldn't want to make any claims about its absolute safety. I think that it's pretty clear based on that local tradition and that cultural context that it is possible to use it without extremely detrimental effects, and with potentially, at least according to them, beneficial ones. So I did use it. In the past, I had only used purified ibogaine hydrochloride that had been produced via the Chris Jenks method that is depicted at the end of the episode, where boa cangine is extracted from Blaconga africana, and then a demethoxycarbonylation process is used to remove the methyl ester to produce ibogaine. So I had actually never, strictly speaking, used an Iboga derived alkaloid before, and the doses varied depending on what day of the ritual it was. So everyone used a small sort of stimulant dose, uh, and that would be maybe comparable to, I don't know, maybe something like 75 milligrams of ibogaine hydrochloride. And then on the final night, everyone used a larger dose. And I would maybe compare that. It was more a more profound experience than I've ever had from uh, ibogaine hydrochloride. But I've never used more than 50 milligrams of ibogaine hydrochloride. But I might loosely suggest that it was somewhere in the range of, similar to what I am might imagine 150 milligrams might feel like. And I'm aware that people use much, much higher doses than that. There are people that use grams of ibogaine. So 150 milligrams is actually pretty low on the reported dosage scale. But for me, it was sufficient. It was powerful. It was profound. It had, you often hear people compare the psychedelic experience to psychotherapy, and they'll say, when I used LSD, it was like 10 years of psychotherapy in 10 hours. But it's kind of it's an analogy. I wouldn't really say that it's actually like psychotherapy. Whereas I would say that ibogaine is actually like psychotherapy,
Hmm.
in that it has an almost verbal character where I would verbally work. It was like an extended conversation with myself
Hmm.
that lasted the entire night, where I'd work through problems in this hyper logical way.
Hmm.
And it was like It,
Did
it
you
wasn't
felt
like a
you
sort
felt
of,
like your mental faculties were intact?
oh, absolutely. I felt like I was more logical than I have ever been in my entire life. And it wasn't like a kind of, there can be a somewhat reductive and unrealistic character to the revelations that certain psychoactive drugs promote, like MDMA, where you might think, I love everyone, I forgive everyone, everyone is, good, or something like that. There
Hmm.
wasn't, it wasn't like that. There wasn't this feeling of, oh, it's just the answer is love, everything is love, or anything. Like, it was kind of, it was a very logical
Hmm.
unpacking, and in some sense a very um, a sort of detached perspective on a lot of events in my life, where I felt like I could see them from some kind of pseudo objective perspective, where I would think like, oh, you think you hate this person, but you don't hate that person at all. You actually love that person. And the reason that you think you hate them is because it's easier to think that you hate them than it is to recognize that something complicated happened, and that it's more painful that it happened to someone that you actually like. And so you're pretending that you dislike them, but the whole reason you were ever involved with them in the first place is because you actually like them, and you're causing yourself more pain
Hmm.
by pretending that you dislike them. Where if you just acknowledge that the reason that you were ever acquainted with them in the first place is because you like them, then it will make it less painful when you think about them. All this kind of like endless dissection of relationships in a way that felt like I was, just like unknotting a twisted string of bizarre delusions and justifications to straighten out my own mind. And it felt fantastic.
Hmm.
By the end of it, I felt like the luckiest person in the world.
So it felt, you just put this image in my mind of a literal unknotting, like you're cramped up and everything's excessively complicated in terms of your rationale for different relationships. And there's a kind of release that comes from literally unknotting these convoluted stories you had told yourself.
Yeah, yeah, and it was very, I would say, very real, very actionable. There's a kind of a stereotype that people have when it comes to psychoactive drugs, that the revelations are delusions, and that in the hard light of day, when you look back on it, you'll realize it was just a drug induced delusion, and none of it had any meaning. This was so far from that. In some sense, it's very personal, and to go into all of it would be beyond the scope of this discussion. But it was very real, and to this
Mhm.
day, I look back at it as like I genuinely believe it was the most logical I have ever been in my life, and it it was such a gift to be able to think about things the way that I was at that time. But in terms of the visual experience, it's not very visual. It does not. It produces closed eye visions. I was having kind of like maybe like Keith Haring esque kind of like line drawing type imagery, but I was uh, I was really just like in this extended dialogue with myself that lasted the entire night, that felt like it was all oriented toward working through problems and coming to a reinterpreted understanding of my relationships that was beneficial and persists to this day.
Wow. How do they administer it?
With a plastic spoon. It's
I,
a it's a how it's a it's the root of a tree. The tree is dried. The root is dried. The outer bark is scraped off. It's sifted. It's collected. It's kept in a crystal goblet, and the Iboga is dosed either with a plastic soup spoon, or the Bwitiist takes a pinch of the material between his thumb and forefinger and just uh, puts it into people's mouths. It's not weighed on a scale, but they even say in my piece that there's a posology to everything, and that is true. They're looking at every person. They're giving a certain amount to children, a certain amount to the elderly, a certain amount to women, a certain amount to men, a certain amount to people that are using it to dance, a certain amount to people that are musicians. And they are really thinking about how to organize this immensely intricate ceremony that is like a performance. It's like it's like so many things. It's a religious it's a transcendent religious festival that is also almost like a dance party, that is also like a concert,
Hmm.
that
The whole
is
village participates in it.
also like a hospital. Like
Wow.
it's really strange.
That sounds fascinating though. What so is it swallowed or do you absorb it? Do you let it sit in your mouth?
It's swallowed and they give you water to wash it down.
Hmm.
And sometimes they give you other little things, like I think there's little like maybe a small amount of smoked tobacco or a small amount of whiskey or something would be consumed with it, but for the most part it's just swallowed and washed down with water.